All right. Welcome back, everybody, to Mom's Adventure Paradox podcast. Kat here. I'm your host. I have with me a very special guest, the beautiful Sherle Stevens. If you are listening and not watching, you may want to watch this one on YouTube because she has the most fabulous red glasses on. What are you wearing and where in the world are you today, Sherle? You just look fabulous. I'm so happy to see you.
Oh, thank you. I'm just thrilled to be here, Kat. It's an amazing thing to think that we connected first over 20 years ago.
Let's talk about that. So, over 20 years ago, just to set the stage, Cheryl and I met through the incredible Debbie Ford, and I was going through my life coaching certification for the Blueprint certification, and you, I think, were my mentor
I think I
coach.
was, yes.
Yes. And we won't go into that story right now, but I just want to say I am probably on this planet in part only because of you, my friend. So
Okay.
take that in and just the beauty of coaching and working with another and having a conversation, which is a lot of what coaching is that opportunity to drop in and reflect on who you see in the mirror, who you want to see in the mirror. You know, we have this adventure, I believe, that we came here for. And I had the privilege of reading your new memoir, which just came out. I want to make sure people who are listening to this saying, someday I'll write a book, someday. What year, what was the someday that you published this book, Cheryl? Just so people know.
You mean why I did it?
How
What?
old are you? At what
Oh,
year?
I just turned 86 at Christmas time. I began it 2.5 years ago. And so it took a while to do it. And someone in a reading I had, somebody that I talk about in the book, toward the end of the book, and he's listed in the resources, said, your guides are saying you're going to write a book. Do you have any reality on that? And I said, well, I never aspired to that. I was always an artist. I wanted to be a singer. I did a little of that. And I've loved being a numerologist for 51 years now. And I loved all that, but I never thought about writing a book. I had taken journalism in school, so I knew how to write, but when he said that, I said, well, I was thinking about just leaving like a document for friends. I have
Mm,
three very close women friends in their 50s that I thought, I knew that they wanted to hear more about my adventures, and I knew that they would love to know how I felt deep inside, especially after I pass. They
mm.
would want to know that I really felt the peace that um, the estrangement from my daughter brought to me.
Thank you so much. And I just want to read the title. I held the book up a minute ago, but for those who aren't watching, Big as the Whole Wide World, Finding Peace Beyond My Karmic Family Ties. You are going to want to read this book. If you have anything going on with a family member that you might be struggling with and trying to understand why is this relationship the way it is, and what other way could it be? When we were chatting yesterday, you talked about there being a third way. I think so often people get into black and white thinking. Could you touch on that?
Yes. Well, there's either continuing to be in an abusive situation because it's family and you don't feel that you have a choice, especially if you want to feel that you're a good person, that you have to keep giving more and more opportunities for the other person to show up and love you and be kind to you and so forth. So there's that. And then there's just no more. I'm done.
Mm,
And without further words, without even saying, I don't ever want to see you again, but just simply not speaking anymore, not contacting anymore, just to be in estrangement. And I
mm.
was in that situation for maybe 5 years. And then I came across a couple of books while I was writing this book. Um, in fact, the epilogue, although please don't run to the end and read the end first, but the epilogue is written a year later than the rest of the book.
Mm. Well,
So
and you're going to want to read through. I think the process of writing a book and it doesn't surprise me that your guide said this book is coming through now. It's not A to B. Sometimes it is. People have the download, they write it in the weekend, publisher, they meet on Monday, etc. But for most of the authors that I've interviewed, and my own experience of writing a book, is that the things you're supposed to come across, the thoughts, the perspective, they show up in divine timing.
Absolutely. No
Your
question.
epilogue, I mean, showing up a year after the fact. And I don't want to fast forward. Let's back up a little bit to some of your earlier adventures. The one I'm thinking of specifically is the adventure of motherhood, knowing how badly you wanted to be a mom, and then your experience of pregnancy and the gentleman you were with, who I think you were married to
Yes.
on the boat. Will you just tell folks who haven't read this because it's such a snapshot into the kind of adventure that you came here for? Just whew.
Well, I first of all, I really, my book opens pretty much with the fact that I really wanted to leave because I didn't feel loved by my mother. So we start with that feeling in my heart, but I did stay, and so even as a child, I longed to become a mother, and I was just always looking for love. So I met a young man, when I was in art school. It was my third year of college, and I he wasn't a nice person, but he was an adventurer and he was an incredible painter. And he had been places and done things, and he even knew Ernest Hemingway.
Ah,
So, I mean, who was my favorite author at the time as a 19-year-old girl. So I was so hooked, and I overlooked the fact that he was not a nice person in order to just go places and do things and see the people that he knew somehow to do, just to see and meet. So I followed him to Europe and married him there. And he wanted to live on a sailboat. He wanted to sail an ocean going sailboat that would cross the Atlantic. And then he would be able to charter it, in Florida and whatever. I never made it that far because I did get pregnant immediately after marrying him, and he wanted nothing to do with that, and I didn't want to deliver a baby in a sailboat in the middle of the Atlantic. So I came back
well,
home, and let
yeah. And I feel like, what's coming through for me is that idea of came back to face the music, but also the paradox of adventure, right?
oh, absolutely. When I saw
And
your title, I was like, absolutely.
well, I feel like let's touch on the relationship with your mom a little bit because coming back to your mom, you weren't sure, you had to send and ask for money. You weren't sure if they got the message, to get back. And then the humility, and the distinction between humility and humiliation, right?
And
But
fear.
and fear and coming back and raising your child with your mom, who you're still processing all of these feelings you have about her not being the mom that you wanted or needed her to be.
Yeah.
What was that like coming back?
um, I was grateful. I was cautious. um, it's so hard. I mean, she was a good person. And in fact, also in the epilogue, you see I have a whole uh, different take on that experience of her and who she was, and have made amends in my heart to her. Um, and my father, who I loved very much, but was seldom on the scene. He was working, or, not there. My mother was always there, and she was very critical. That was the part that was hard for me. And but when I came back from Europe, pregnant, they were both kind to me, but my father was distant. And I didn't realize that he really was actually ill, and would soon die.
Mm.
So that was odd for him to be distant. But my mother really did try very hard to be good and kind, and I lived with them. I finally wanted, when she was 2 years old, I wanted to get an apartment for us, and be more independent. And she was very upset about that. But
Mm.
except for that, which I finally did do that. But anyway, I was always going off to other places because of the movies.
Mm,
My biggest
yes.
influence.
Well, and I think for many, I mean, here we are in the age of social media, right? You could be anywhere in the world doing this, you know? And let's talk about New York City because as an artist, that calling, the Mecca, what was it for you about New York City? And then also the paradox, we'll get into this a little bit, of
Okay.
bringing a child with you to New York City.
Right. Well, even before I left for Europe, I was already a fashion illustrator at a department store because back in the day, before photography was the main way that people sold clothes in department stores, we had fashion illustrators. And I grew up from, I'd taken a class in it in high school, even from the age of 13. I've had a subscription to Vogue my whole life. I still can't let go of it. And so I was just enamored with that. And New York to me was the heart and the seat of all creativity.
Mm,
Some people find it in other places, but that was the one for me. So, as an illustrator, before I'd gone to Europe, I knew I could come back and get a good job, no matter what city I was in, because this was happening all over every place in the country. So, in my hometown of Indianapolis, I eventually worked for all four stores, because one would hire me away and then the other would, another would and everything. And so I was very admired in the business. And finally, also we got to see what they call tear sheets. So I could see in the production office every day, I could look and see what all the other illustrators in the country were doing because they were tearing out, so by the time I thought, I think I'm good enough to go to New York. And then when I got to New York, I found out that the fashion illustrators didn't work as a job in the store, they were freelance.
mm,
Then I got an agent, which took me on a very painful little journey when I found out you can't do both in New York. You can't be up all night freelancing, doing a sketch or a painting and turn it in the next morning and go to work all day. You remember that?
yeah. Yeah, oh, I remember that chapter. And also just going from being in Indianapolis where you were sort of your own boss, you had your own office, there was light, to being
Oh,
in a small room with multiple artists, right? And again, the paradox of like, is this the adventure I signed? Is this really it? Right?
even though it
But
was like
then,
it was McCall's Pattern Company, and it was like a big deal in the most prestigious, um, tallest building on Park Avenue on the 40 something floor, And then I was taken to this little room, not until after they hired me and I got there on my first day. If I'd said
mm,
this, I probably wouldn't have taken the job. And then they introduced me to the two artists who barely looked up from the drawing board, and no wonder because then I was told we're not allowed to talk to each other. So
we're we're right
in New
there
York,
with you in the story. We're right there with you. And again, I don't want to give too much away about the book because I really, really want to encourage people to read it. But I do want to touch on, because I think that this will really resonate with our audience, the idea of mom guilt, where we're doing something for ourselves, but then we look at how it is or is not working for our child, where they are, what's best for them. Will you just touch on that experience? Because,
that was
yeah.
excruciating because prior to that, my daughter and I were so close, and she was going to nursery school in Indianapolis, and every day I would pick her up after work, and she'd come running out to the car, and she'd say, "Can I go back again tomorrow?" And I would say, "Yes," and we'd just laugh, and it was just so joyous. And we got to New York, and I got there 3 weeks before she did, and a friend brought her later after I found an apartment, and I had called 50 nursery schools to find a placement for her, and
Mm,
I only found one, and it was up in Harlem. And so it was quite a way uptown from, I was on the same side of New York, but on the west side. But, um, you know, I got there to take her on the first day because I just made arrangements over the phone. No, they didn't even invite me in to see the school, which
mm,
that should have been a warning. But on the first day of school, I said, "Okay, mommy will be back after work," and she said, "Okay," and she toddled off with this woman. And then the next morning, she threw her arms around my neck and said, please don't leave me, please don't leave me, please don't leave me."
Mm.
And this was so unlike her. And I said, I'm so sorry, honey. I have to go to work, but I'll be back. And then there was the blackout, the very first blackout in New York that could have been even worse for us. But because she was home with chicken pox, and not at school, it was at 5:30 at night. I had just gotten off the subway and walked a few blocks, walked into the apartment building, got on the elevator, went up to the 10th floor, walked down the hall, opened the door, and the lights went out.
Gosh,
And
that was a wild story. Yeah, keep going with it because
yeah,
5 minutes before you would have been on the subway, and many people were on the subway.
and
Yeah, take us in.
800,000 were on the subway. And they had no idea what was happening. I mean, there were no cell phones back in the day. I mean, they had no idea. And all the trains stopped. And finally, the police were able to go underground. But how many trains must there have been all over Manhattan? And they were able to get people out with, big lights and everything. But if they had stepped on the third rail and the lights had come back on, they would have electrocuted them. So it was a terrifying, horrifying thing. And the lights didn't come on until 4 in the morning. But but anyway, so I would have been on that, or I would have been stuck in the elevator and unable to get help from anyone.
Wow.
And I wouldn't have been able to get to her if she'd been at school. So
Mm,
I mean, the thought of she was already, something was wrong already about
mm,
school.
mm.
So the next morning I thought, that's it, we're leaving. I just So she was only in school really about 6 weeks, but
And
totally,
then you went home after that. That was the straw that broke the
that
camel's
was
back.
it. Yeah.
Yeah,
And I
yeah.
had had that premonition. Do you remember me writing about that on the way home? Because I had been thinking, this just isn't what I thought it would be to be a New Yorker. I
Yeah.
have no life here and she's miserable. I mean, this isn't right.
Mm-hmm,
Something
mm-hmm.
is going to help me decide. Tonight I'll either have a phone call from home, from somebody at home that will make me want to come back, or I'll have a letter, because back then people still wrote letters. There will be something that will make me be able to decide one way or the other. And man, it did.
Blackout. Wow. Yeah, I mean, just thinking about our connection and our history with Debbie Ford and shadow work, right? Blackout, right? The thing when it's just this, right? And we can just boil it down to what really is important. I had another epiphany as you were talking just now, which is the Mommy Games series, which I just did. I interviewed a series of different moms, and we're all at different stages of motherhood, right?
Yeah.
And sitting around different sides of the table on motherhood. And I would love to hear you touch on your perspective of your daughter as a child, because you mentioned reading an article, I think it was in the New York Times, about the children who remembered or the children who know. Will you touch on that and these things you saw in
Yes.
your daughter?
Yes. Well, when she was, first of all, when she was 22 months old, so not even two, I was brushing her very fine long hair, and we just kind of fallen into a reverie, when neither one of us were speaking. I was just doing this, and it was the back of her hair, so I couldn't see her face.
Mm,
And all of a sudden, she said, I remember being born. As And I was thrilled. First of all, the little pregnancy booklet that had been given to me in England mentioned that in the very last part of the last page of it said, sometimes little children might remember being born. They might say, I was scared, or it was dark.
mm,
And so I was just thrilled about that. But also I thought, there's more. This is more than just that. And so I knew that I had to just keep calmly doing this, or um, brushing her hair slowly and carefully, and not sound excited, or this,
mm.
whatever this miracle was happening, because this was way beyond her speech pattern, but it did sound like her voice. So I knew I couldn't get excited. So I just said as calmly as I could, what was it like? And she said, as calmly as possible, she just said, oh, we were standing in line behind God, waiting for our turn.
Mm.
And it was the thrill of a lifetime. I still, to this day, treasure that as the most enormous gift of grace I've ever had.
Mm, that's so beautiful. Oh,
And so that was not quite 2 years old when she was 3 years old. Um, and I was just walking out the door and I had to go somewhere. And she was at my mother's house. And she was looking at a scrapbook of pictures of me when I was little. And she pointed to one little tiny picture. And she said, "Oh, I was your friend when you were this age. But
mm,
then I died later."
wow.
And I thought, what?
Oh,
And then I thought, how could this child know about death? We didn't even have a TV set. I mean, she couldn't have even seen Cowboys and Indians or anything, the
mm,
concept of death, to say I died later. But I had to run out the door for some appointment. And so I couldn't stay to try to find out more.
yeah.
And then when she was 5 years old, that's the one that changed everything. When we were at a birthday party, and we left, and it was a Sunday afternoon in a lovely neighborhood of houses, and I just reached with my right hand to take her hand across the street, and I looked at the left, even though there was no traffic, but you always look, and all of a sudden she jerked her hand away from my hand, and when I turned to look at her, she was so angry.
Mm.
And I said, "What?" And she said, "I liked it a lot better when I was the mother and you were the little girl." And the energy was just totally different than the energy had ever been between us.
Wow. Yeah, it's so interesting as a reader reading those, and we're right there with you. It's like I'm thinking about waves. It's like a face splash, where you're going, whoa, whoa, and also just deeper and deeper into this ocean, or if we look at the visual on your book, under the lily pads, right? Like deep into this
Yeah,
still pond.
right.
What would you say? I mean, we have glimmers in your relationship of challenges, the New
Mhm.
York and making the decision, I got to be the parent. We're going back. This isn't working, right?
Right.
And then the teen years, pretty much a challenge for everybody, right?
Oh,
But you're also having this affair. Will you just touch on, your experience of things starting to turn as you're doing your own work, right? Because mom ain't happy, ain't nobody happy. We've got to do our own work.
right.
But we're also parenting and modeling, and none of us got manuals, right? None of us got instruction books. We're doing the best that we can to raise up our children. I can hear my grandmother saying, God made you sovereign over those children, right? I know. And then also just the reality of when we have certain belief systems that maybe keep us stuck in abusive patterns or relationships that simply aren't working. Where would you say that things turned? And will you take us through those adolescent years a little bit?
Well, I think it's so hard to really say. It would fluctuate. I
Mm,
mean, it wasn't like 100% every minute of every day, but the overriding thing was that sometimes if we were close, we were very close. But then, and the conundrum for me was never knowing why, what the anger was. She would never tell me. So I talked later in the book about how, reflecting back on those times, and as I did the writing of the book, um, getting into files and finding old emails and everything, and I found that um, what I had written to Debbie after that shadow process and what I had learned, and then I saw just a couple of years ago how I had this program of within me with the shadow that, because of looking for love and giving up my power, and that in the shadow process, which she would take us through, where we would, in a meditative state, we would see someone, and I saw this person that said, "You keep." She kept kicking me actually, and I felt like she was kicking my chair to get my attention. And she said, "You keep crying instead of getting angry. And that's how you give up your power." Bingo. Yeah. And so I realized looking back on those teen years that that's what I did. I just always wanted to know why things were so awful when they were, and I never got any answer. And that was her power I felt over me as I was reviewing all this, and that I was codependent.
Will
Yeah,
you explain codependency? Because this is another big buzzword, but in your perspective, how did you see yourself as codependent in that
I
time?
think I think that it's always been a word that's hard to grasp for me too. I guess probably because I live in it. that I'd love to hear your take on it so I can get it deeper. But it's being dependent on other people's approval. I guess that's and love. For me, it was their love.
Yeah, I think, the quote I was just mentioning earlier, if mom ain't happy, ain't nobody happy.
Right.
I feel like there's a joke and I have it on the tip of my tongue, but um, if you're okay, I'm okay. That's sort of codependency, right?
Right.
And there's a piece of
That's it.
co-regulation, which is appropriate, babies crying. I mean, I remember feeling my breast milk coming in, right, when my child
Yes.
was crying, And there is that time where your bodies are really so closely linked. And
Yes.
then there's that time where you're really becoming your own person. And that's why in adolescence, there's so much of that assertion for independence and challenging and testing rules and finding our way that's appropriate, that's supposed to happen, but can be quite triggering for the systems that the family has built, or the parents. So I don't know if that's helpful at all or not, but you touched on love and seeking love. And I was thinking about your lover and wife and thinking, the first time you didn't even see her, you heard her voice. That must
Yes.
have been so powerful. Will you tell us the story and just the feeling in your body of, awakening to this love and hearing it?
Well, the interesting thing too is I have to say she's my wife and a partner, but she's not my lover. We and not in the sexual sense. And you know, it's we're not both gay. So for openers, it's something that I've heard people describe as a Boston marriage.
I love
That's
that.
really an old, it sounds like an old Massachusetts, kind of thing, but it means that's a love deeper than friendship. And it's just on another level. It's on the level of being committed in a way that's even more than friendship. But anyway, when I first heard her voice, the telephone rang at the studio, my studio. Now my studio is here in my home, but at the time I had a separate one. And when she said, "Miss Stevens," I was like, well, this isn't a client. No, nobody's ever had that energy in their voice. And so she said, I want to know if you would sell this painting that's in the restaurant for sale. And I said, well, yes, of course. And she said, would it be all right if I brought you a check right now? And I said, absolutely. And I had just lost a freelance job that would have covered the studio rent that month. So I was thrilled because this was going to be more than that. And and the interesting thing was, if this had been back in the day when people had cell phones, this was like 1997. So this was, uh, um, and if it had been, when people were really into social media so much and really just constantly looking at their phone, she would never even seen the painting, even though it was hanging right next to her. And in fact, the woman in the painting was looking down at her. It's kind of interesting, but she would have never seen it. But they lost her order, or if she'd just eaten quickly and left, she wouldn't have seen it either. So, God was at work here,
Yeah.
obviously. And so when she came over, I was just so delighted. Her energy was exactly like her voice.
Mm.
A wonderful person. And then, so she gave me the check and we arranged to have lunch together at the end of the month when the show would come down that was at the restaurant. And so we met for lunch there. It's called the Dream Cafe. And we always go there now every year for our anniversary to have lunch.
Oh,
But, and it's just still the same woman still owns it, just gets a out of
oh,
us, as because we were only in our early 50s then. She was 52. I think I was 58.
oh.
I know.
Well,
And
you're just the most beautiful couple, and thank you for clarifying the Boston marriage because I love that.
isn't it wonderful? Well, and I think it's something that more women might be open to if they experienced being around
Mhm.
people who had that experience. I don't know. It was a God deal. I don't know how else to say it.
A
But
total God deal.
when we had that lunch, I said, "Oh, let me do your numerology. What's your birthday?" And it was a week from mine, just a week before mine. So that was interesting. But when I did the part about her name, she had the same three major name numbers that I do, and I'd only seen that once in 50 years. Well, only 30 years at that time, I guess. But um, and at that moment when I saw that, I heard a voice say, and it was it God, was it my guides? I don't know. A voice said, "Pay attention to this woman. She's important in your life." It was just so clear. Yeah.
Oh, it's so beautiful. I love that so much. And I love, those voices that we hear. And
Yes.
again, you heard her voice, and then you met her, and then just the energy, and then you're doing her reading. And we want to touch on this because I know you have a special gift for our listeners,
Oh,
and
I
you are
do.
so good at doing numerology readings. I don't have your book here with me, but your numerology book is amazing. Your actual readings are just out of this world. For someone who's never heard of numerology before, will you just give us a bird's eye view of what it is and what a reading looks like?
Well, it's actually older than astrology, and it came through many different countries. There are more than I've even paid attention to, really. There's but Chinese and Egyptian and Hebrew, and I mean, there are many different kinds. But I follow the type that was perfected by Pythagoras, and we met him when we were taking algebra, right? And I never, this is the funny thing, I never could stand arithmetic. Any of the math classes, I was like, let me out of here. But, but numerology, but numbers and letters themselves always spoke to me. And so I think that maybe this is a past life experience too, because as soon as I had a reading myself, then I saw everything that I hoped I was, thought I was, hoped I might become, was
Mm.
just there on the paper. I was like, I said, "Oh, please teach me, please teach me, please teach me." And I just, it was another beautiful coincidence of somebody I just happened to meet when I took a class in person. And she sat down and showed me that. So it's been a joy of mine for all these 51 years to read for people.
It's so awesome. And I know you're offering readings for our listeners. So
Yes, I am.
there will be info in the show notes, but do you want to just share your email?
Sure. Yes, my email is actually I'm using because I'm first of all to get a $250 reading instead of a $350 reading. Yeah, you come to my personal email address, which is CABARETJAZZ. So it's Cabaret Jazz 1122 at gmail.com. And then just contact me personally.
I love that.
And, or you can text me. You want me to give my phone number so they can text me?
Yeah, and we'll put it all in the show notes too. But yeah,
Okay.
go ahead and lead it out if you want.
214-403-4583. And you can text me or even call me. And we'll just make arrangements. I'll just send you an invoice because if you want, you can go to my website. Please do, and you can read more about it. But I'm not going to change the price on my
Yeah.
website just
Yeah.
because it's too much of a hassle.
And
So
that is a very generous $100 discount. You're definitely going to want to do this.
and it's 90 minutes. We have a Zoom call like this and for 90 minutes. And before that, I've already sent you a picture of your chart. And and several pages of notes, and we're going to go over those notes in great detail. But it
Oh,
thrills me. Here's what I want you to know if you do this is that it's about what you want the most in life,
mm,
who you are. You already came here as that's one number that tells volumes.
yeah.
What you're looking for is your soul number that speaks volumes. And then the birth date says this is the path you're on in this lifetime and why. And
Mm,
it's divided up into sections for the timing of it. So
mm,
where are you right now in this? And then each personal year is a new opportunity, a new lesson, and a new gift. Each
mm.
one builds on the previous one. So when you're in alignment with where you're meant to be, that's when things work.
I love it. Oh,
And
I love that so
yeah.
much. And I remember getting a reading, I think for my 40th birthday or right around there from you. I think I've had a few
Oh,
readings from you, but every time it's like that feeling of coming home where things click and make sense, you know? And then you understand better next steps. Why? Ah, you know? So
yeah.
highly recommend it. Highly
And
recommend it.
the thing that I love about it is because life is hard to figure out, as we're growing up and going through all of the things we go through to be a person. It's hard to remember what the original soul's desire was. Why did you come here? So that's what thrills me.
Oh,
And
it's so good.
getting back to if we have a moment, do we have a moment to? You asked me a question I realized I didn't answer. Was you said you thought I read it in the New York Times about children getting
Right.
messages. It was the New Yorker magazine online. I happened to see this, a big article, and then I found the book. And now about children who are remembering past lives. And this
Mm,
research has been going on for over 50 years at the University of Virginia. And I found there were two books written by a man that's a researcher, and and I got a single volume that's got both books in it called Before.
mm,
And recently I saw Billy Crystal was interviewed on Stephen Colbert, and his son-in-law gave him this book, and he was like so excited. He's created a whole show, a series about it called Before,
cool.
but I can't remember as if it's on Disney or Hulu or whatever, but we'll find it.
Yeah.
It's about these researchers who have done this work all this time
Wow.
and
Oh,
what become of it.
it's amazing. It's making me think of the expression from the mouths of babes.
Yeah,
Right?
absolutely.
Ah, but also, going back to shadow work or therapy or all those things of um, checking in with your inner child and that younger part of yourself that you came here for. And I think as we're closing, I want to make sure we touch on the Camino because you were one of the first people who shared on social media who I knew personally who walked the Camino. And I'd love to hear just again that bird's eye view of what prompted you, like what was the first seed that you maybe wanted to do the Camino one day, and then take us down the road a little bit with you.
All right. Um, the the first seed was going to see a friend um, who had just come back. Well, I called her on the phone. I was visiting somebody else actually in Boston and Cambridge, and I thought, well, I'll check in with her while I'm in town. Maybe see her on the way back to the airport. And she said, I'm so glad you called this week because I wasn't answering the phone for the last couple of weeks and I would have missed you. And I hadn't talked to her in years. We'd met each other many years ago. And so when we got to her house the next day, she invited us to lunch. And I said, did something happen in your family or something? You wouldn't have talked on the phone for 2 weeks. And she said, oh, no. Remember when I went 20 years ago, I told you about going on the Camino? Well, I just went back again. And I didn't want to, I just didn't want to get back into this world. I just wanted to stay
Mm,
in that peace that it brought. So I was in, this was a time that Grace and I, my partner, were not doing well together. And I thought maybe, um, we were not going to stay together. And so suddenly I was just adrift at that point.
mm,
But it gave me a why. And I didn't know, I didn't know why, actually. It gave me a what
Mm,
and a where, but I still didn't know why. But I went anyway, and I had to train. Unlike you, I've never been, and I so admire that you are so energetic and outdoors and all of that. I've always been an indoor girl, just painting and coloring and reading and all of that. And so I knew nothing about, but I knew that I had to get in shape or I would really be in bad trouble. So I did. I spent a year and trained for it, and just to, not muscle training, but just walking and developing the legs. That's what you really
yeah,
need.
yeah.
And it's the most incredible thing I've ever done. I mean, it's just absolutely. Do you want me to read that one little place that I?
Yes, please, will you?
Yeah. Um, I marked this place in the book. Um, whoops. I don't know how much time we have. If you just want me to have
Yeah,
that.
let's read a couple paragraphs and then we'll wrap up.
Okay. Um, I had been walking with somebody, and we'd spent the night in a hotel. And when I got up to go to breakfast, she'd gone, she'd left. And so now I was on my own, truly. And I said, after making my way so carefully um, among the boulders, hour after hour on that tense descent down into Zabiri, the next town, I decided to stop carrying my pack. Instead, I had it carted from village to village in little minivans for a small fee. Unencumbered by the weight of the pack, I was more sure footed. I felt perfectly capable of taking care of myself. And now that I had both of my walking sticks, because I'd given that girl the other one, um, I knew that I'd be able to navigate the challenging terrain. My wonderful guidebook explained how and where to ask for help if I needed it. From then on, I felt as free as a 12-year-old girl without a care in the world. No schedule, no appointments to keep, no one else to take care of, and nothing to do at last but feel this new joy of being surrounded and immersed in nature. There had been nothing before in my life to compare with this feeling of having myself all to myself. For nearly 4 weeks, it was a continual open eyed meditation, and in the midst of such ravishing beauty. I have never felt more loved by God, never more secure or more certain that I was safe and was exactly where and who I was meant to be.
Mic drop.
It's just,
Oh,
I wish for everyone to go, and I wish for them to go alone. If
yeah.
at least to walk alone during the day, even if you go with a partner, a friend, or whatever,
Mm,
but that you walk separately, at your own pace, because to be on a mountaintop or down in a valley and know that you'll find your way to the point where you need to go by
mhm,
yourself.
mhm,
I've never been so present to the world
mm,
and to God.
mm. What a beautiful testimony. And yeah, just the pilgrimage, this journey. I feel Cher coming in right now and
Yeah.
her song, In the End, We All Sleep Alone,
Uh,
right? And we can have these beautiful relationships or challenging relationships and our bloodlines and our chosen family and all of those things. But in the end, this is what we come in and out with, all of this,
to
right?
have yourself all to yourself.
Totally. Ah, you are just such a delight. We will put all the details in the show notes, but you have not told us your website. Where can people
Oh,
find you?
the website, there is a website for the book, billgives-the-whole-wide-world.com. And there's just sherlestevens.com, SHERLESTEVENS.com is the numerology. And then my art, my paintings are on a website. And I have just reduced because 86 years old and I have no heirs beyond my precious Grace, who is 80 years old herself. So I have reduced all the prices of all my paintings to a third of what they were because
Wow.
they need to have homes. So that is SherleStevensStudio.com.
Awesome. Well, we will definitely go and check those out. And I feel like you are not a day over 20 is how I feel.
Well, it's,
But
here's what's so amazing to me, and it was such a joy about writing the book too. I've been so blessed with such a memory
yeah.
that I have always just remembered everything. And when I was coaching, I was shocked at how many people couldn't remember past high school
Mm,
back any further than that. But anyway, I do feel like the same person that I was when I was first a baby, and thinking I could go back to where I came from. I didn't know it was God, but I knew there was a place I could go back to, and I might have a chance to get a different mommy and
mm,
daddy.
yeah.
But I knew it wasn't for sure either.
Mm-hmm. So fascinating. Ah, any last thoughts you want to leave our listeners with today?
There was one other thing that I thought of that we started to talk about, and then I dropped the ball, and I've lost it. So
If,
read the
you
book.
know, I think of it like glitter. I have my unicorn snot here, which is this beautiful
Oh,
glitter stuff.
oh,
And I
how
like the idea that when you put glitter on, whatever's supposed to stick will, and the rest will just fall away.
perfect. That's perfect.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
So
Thank you so much. This was a delight and a joy to be with you, Kat.
absolutely. Thank you, Cheryl. And thank you for putting this incredible book into the world and this work and just this reminder that you don't have to stay in an abusive relationship.
That's it. That's the thing I forgot. That I do want to say that if we can, because that was the piece when you said about the third way, and I never got to the third way. The third way is that you can make amends even if you don't want to reconnect.
Yeah.
You can go within your heart, as I did when I found another woman's books who was my daughter's age, is my daughter's age. And I began to see what maybe my daughter's experience was that she could never tell me.
Mm,
And that's when I actually was blessed to get in touch with a former therapist for both that we had both gone to.
yeah.
And through her, I was able to make amends. And I got a reply that's
Powerful.
beautiful.
Mm,
Really completed it. So I did
yeah.
want to say that there is a
Yeah.
third.
There's a third way. And I think, the third way opens up the door to an infinitesimal number of ways, friends. We get so stuck on this or
Yes,
that, and
yes.
not just
It
about.
can be the third way, and that brings reconciliation or just brings a peaceful estrangement. It should
Yeah.
have a different word, not
Amen.
strange, but a
Yeah.
friendly letting go, a friendly
Mm.
releasing.
Maybe it's a piecement, appeasement.
That's beautiful. I love
There
it.
you go. All
Perfect.
right. I love you. Thank you
Thank
so much,
you.
listeners. If you loved this podcast, please subscribe, follow along, check out Cheryl's work. Don't forget that amazing numerology offer, and do pick up this book, share it with a friend. It will change your life. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye.